There's one thing you can always count on in December. Every year the kids will go wild for something. BB-8s, Furbies, Elmos, Tracy Island. There'll always be one particular toy that captures the imagination, this month most of all. A potent cocktail of marketing, visibility and pure appeal that if you could measure it, bottle it and sell it, would make you richer than Bill Gates. By accident or design, someone stumbles upon it every year. Today we're looking at just one of many toy crazes. One that lasted longer than most, was even crazier than most, and very different from most. And they were simply a bunch of little plushies filled with a few beans. The Beanie Babies. Bears, elephants, lions, gators, toucans. It didn't matter. Without exception, they took the world by storm. And yet, well, this isn't exactly a nice story, to say the least. One man is at the centre of all of this, Ty Warner. This enigmatic man, seldom photographed and interviewed even less, 73 years old from Chicago, has devoted his entire life to plush. After a broken childhood and a few years of struggling as an actor, he worked as a salesman for a plush toy company named Dakin and never looked back. His old boss there said that he was, without question, the greatest salesman he ever worked with. At least until he was fired for selling his own products in competition with the company he worked for. Ty Warner thought he was so good at selling other people's plush that perhaps he should start selling his own. And in 1986 he formed Ty Inc. in his home state to sell the toys he loved so much. The first few years were a struggle. The plush toy business was down and not showing many signs of going up. Flashier toys were the big thing, not to mention video games. What does a stuffed toy have that can compete with Super Mario or even an Action Man? Not a lot really. Ty was close to hitting the wall several times and his response was to continue his singular obsession even at the expense of everything else. By all accounts, his personal life was a disaster. Even as an adult, his father would act as a chaperone on dates, and his marriages were defined by constant talk about plush, family events interrupted by Ty testing out his latest creation, his wives eventually getting involved in the business, and the relationship itself ending in stormy fashion when Ty ultimately took credit for all of their ideas and finally squeezed them out of the business. There is nothing but plush and nothing but Ty. The Beanie Babies were first introduced in 1993, Ty's latest advance in the world of stuffed toys. What exactly separates them from the rest of the pack? I have a few here as it happens. And you know what? It's not like they're badly made. What Ty sought after in his plushies was a certain realism. He didn't like toys that couldn't be posed easily, and the posability of beanies were their selling point. How is this achieved? Simple. You understuff the plushie. If you squeeze a beanie, you can almost feel every individual bean. There's not a lot of them in there. It's easy to figure out the parts stuffed with beans and the ones that aren't, and they are made in a way that's supposed to accurately emulate the animal being recreated in plushy form. The understuffed beanie, therefore, is more posable, and your kid will also find them more huggable. This was also important for Ty's other obsession, getting the absolute best pictures of his dolls, spending hours agonising over the perfect shot that will sell the plush. This also applied to Ty's presence at toy fairs across the country, where the company became famous for their utterly meticulous displays that Warner himself would personally oversee, forever brushing the beanies down and obsessing over the last details. And it also applied to the factories in China and South Korea where the beanies were made. Ty Warner would spend 6 months of the year over there, ensuring that the products were up to snuff, that the best quality material was being used, and that worker conditions in the factories that made beanies were good, as a miserable sweatshop would hardly be able to produce something that a child would cherish. No matter the amount of employees he had working for him, and there were never too many, Ty was a one-man army who would do everything if he were able to. And yet despite this dedication to every step of the business, from design and creation to the very point of sale, the beanies hardly took off immediately. For the next couple of years they struggled to sell at all. Kids just weren't interested. Perhaps it didn't help that beanies couldn't be found on the shelves of your local Toys R Us or whatever. Instead they would be in smaller gift shops and the like. Ty had a fixed price of $5 for the sale of beanies that was not expensive, but he still didn't want to cheapen them by putting them in the big warehouse stores. In any case, the beanies were not successful. So around about 1995, a couple of Ty executives were selling at another fair. Despite the lack of success, the Beanie line is still going, and in the morning the salespeople are fielding questions about certain toys that had been a part of the Beanie line but no longer were. Each time they would tell a buyer that they were discontinued, and that ended their interest. What follows is an interesting example of sales psychology. Over lunch, the executives decided, independent of Ty Warner, that instead of saying that the toys were discontinued, they'd say that they were retired, and see what happened. In the afternoon, when the execs said that the toys were retired, that wouldn't stop the inquiry. Indeed, the interest in the toy would be perked up as people wondered where they could get these retired items. And this was the genesis of what would make beanies a phenomenon. It's simple. If you say that a toy is discontinued, it devalues it. Say it's retired, however, well, the opposite happens. People are willing to pay for something that's been gracefully withdrawn that others are less likely to have. And this is what happened with the initial collectors of beanies in 1996. People, mostly women in their 30s from the suburbs in Illinois, who stumbled across the toys, found out they were retired models and ended up collecting the entire line for not a lot of money. As the beanie craze spread all over the country, the value of these retired models went up astronomically. One particularly famous example was Peanut the elephant. 4 months after the beanie was introduced, with only a couple of thousand made, Ty made the decision to change its colour from royal blue to baby blue. The royal blue Peanut would be the figurehead of the beanie craze in the ensuing years. If you found him, well, you could sell him for thousands of dollars. By the end of 1996, the beanies were catching fire, pursued by soccer moms and dads across America and ultimately the world. Any new beanies released for the regular $5 price would be pounced upon in the hope that one of them would end up being another Peanut, and a huge secondary market opened up based around the retired beanies. The initial collectors from the Illinois suburbs who'd become rich off of beanies started communicating with other prospectors through magazines and websites such as Mary Beth's Beanie World. The rise of the internet was a massive factor. While Ty Warner himself didn't even have a computer, one of his young employees would set up a website that people would flock to, and when the site announced which of the current lines were to be retired, it would virtually bring the web to its knees. And of course, there was eBay. Beanies were by far the biggest seller on the nascent online auction site, even after Ty Warner took out an injunction against eBay to stop them referring to Beanie Babies as their official name. It's fair to say that eBay might not have survived the dot-com bubble if it weren't for the success of the beanies in the first few years. Now, you might ask yourself something. Where exactly were the kids in all of this? Well, they weren't really. It's not that kids didn't like them, it's just that they couldn't get in front of all the adults buying them. The success of the beanies was down to adults seeing how successful and rich these understuffed plushies had made people and thinking that they could do the same. People quit their jobs in order to get into the beanie market, buying up thousands of them, obsessing over the retired lines on this huge secondary market. It's like tulips in Holland. Even as the craze made Ty Warner into a multi-millionaire, he didn't appreciate this, often taking out injunctions and lawsuits against beanie-focused sites and publications, and speaking negatively in private of the people who were buying up all this plush as a means to try and get rich quick. There are a few moments and anecdotes that sum the mania up best of all. There was the McDonald's tie-in. Even though Ty was utterly resolute when it came to not commercialising the toys through traditional TV advertising and what have you, he obviously wasn't going to turn down Ronald. Special teeny Beanie Babies were packed into Happy Meals, and the result was insanity. Suddenly restaurants were swamped with collectors. You'd have people going into McDonald's, buying 100 Happy Meals, and then telling the cashiers to keep the food. They just wanted the toys. That's not a joke. Employees of McDonald's made badges saying that they survived the beanie tie-in. Szechuan's sauce could only dream of creating such a hubbub. Another anecdote came from someone who worked with kids from troubled homes. She used beanies to help her kids over the course of 2 months and found that they were very effective. In this environment, the kids loved them. The programme was very productive. And then, on the final day, the kids would be allowed to take the beanies home. And fights broke out because the kids' parents had told them to try and get specific ones because, hey, they might be worth some money. All that hard work undone. What does that tell you? Money sure does weird things to people, even when it comes in the form of an understuffed bear. In October 1999, a man named Jeffrey White shot and killed Harry Simmons at a hardwood plant in West Virginia. The main cause of the dispute was hundreds of dollars worth of beanies that White had borrowed from Simmons. Broken families, fights in food courts, people who quit their job and lost their savings, first-degree murder. You wouldn't expect an innocent-looking toy to be the cause, but that was what happened at the height of the insanity. Until, as all bubbles eventually do, it burst. On August 1999, Ty shocked the world by announcing that on December 31st, all Beanie Babies would be discontinued. The secondary market had plateaued, and this was seen as a way to get things going again. It didn't. Instead, it was the nail in the coffin. The market was swamped with tons of retired beanies, and all of them were basically not worth anything. It was too much for the buyers to take, and so most of them decided to bow out. The manufacture of beanies was resumed in 2000, but the boom was over. Those who still had thousands of beanies, these fins that were going to pay for their children's college education, well, they weren't going to anymore. Beanies, even new ones, are still somewhat around today. Ty Warner, now 73 with a fortune of $2.5 billion, a series of failed relationships and a conviction for tax evasion behind him, still flies the flag at the toy fairs. The toys are now little more than a nostalgic joke, and in a way it's all kind of sad. Plush is a strange thing that you either get or you don't. For some it's just a cute little toy. For others it functions as a means of love when there's not much of it to be found elsewhere. That was the case with Ty Warner and might explain his obsession, at least partly. But the Beanie Baby craze was never something that could be envisioned, and in the end it was perhaps responsible for more grief than joy, more hate than love. And what of them now? Well, the beanies you see here were bought for a few quid. Only the rarest of the rare are worth anything whatsoever. But shouldn't a plushie be worth more than just a monetary figure? It's almost something that should be priceless, at least to someone. But alas, the beanies are not that. They were mocked, distorted, abused, and forgotten. And sadly, in the end, there's nobody around to love them anymore.